The live stream counter in Judge McKinley's courtroom ticked past 12,000 viewers, and I could see my own face lagging on the county website like a bad meme, while the judge peered over her glasses and asked, very gently, whether I was asserting conception by immaculate deposition, which is not, she clarified, a real legal doctrine, but felt appropriate given the way our family lawyer kept blessing himself with confidentiality. Somewhere behind me, a church friend gasped. Someone else coughed the word infidelity. And all I could think was that I used to be a simple suburban guy who bought mulch on sale, and now America was watching my divorce like a season finale. So, yes, Your Honor, I said, but only if we can rewind the tape to the Costco parking lot where I first noticed my wife had started dressing like a witness entering a safe house. The beginning of the end smelled like rotisserie chicken and jalapeno samples. Emily, my wife, moved through our Sundays with a new choreography. Head tilted, phone angled, little smile that used to be for me, now curving for someone whose name vibrated her Apple Watch at odd hours. Our neighbors on the cul-de-sac, veterans of block parties, Little League, and the HOA's great mailbox height schism, had theories. The moms whispered cheating over Trader Joe's produce. The dads shrugged and said marriages hit ruts, and also did I want tickets to the Friday night game. I told myself it was stress. I told myself every marriage has seasons. I told myself not to be the guy who spirals on next door. But then I saw the Venmo. 3 payments to R. Sterling file review with avocado emojis and a lock. Our family lawyer, Robert Sterling, square jaw, suede loafers, the kind of reassuring voice that makes you sign things, had handled our estate paperwork, our refinance, even the LLC for Emily's candle side hustle. We'd once toasted his wisdom with backyard bourbon under string lights while he explained the beauty of a well-drafted prenup, even for strong love, and Emily had laughed and said ours was stronger than paper. But now the paper trail smelled like cologne. One Tuesday I followed her, which is not heroic, it's just what you do when the word betrayal starts tasting metallic in your mouth. She said she was hitting book club. Her GPS said she turned toward downtown. I parked across from the old hotel bar where alumni groups gather to remember their prime and flirt with deli counter dignity. Through the glass I saw the outline. Emily leaning toward him, the family lawyer, their heads a secret city of whispers. He looked like the anchor of a local news segment on how to protect your family, and she looked like every part of my life that used to be sturdy. I didn't storm in. I did what modern Americans do. I recorded a shaky video that would make any jury seasick, then went home, sat in the driveway, and listened to the garage's cool darkness hum. That night she came in late with a breezy apology about someone's baby shower planning exploding. We lay in the same bed but lived in different planets. She said goodnight and turned her back in a way that meant, don't ask me anything. Around out of 2, I woke to the blue light of her phone and the sentence, "We have to be careful, he trusts you," floating like neon in my brain. You hear about toxic love, and you think other people. You hear cheating, and you think it's a tabloid storm, not a weather pattern forming over your own kitchen island where a single mug still waits for coffee grounds. The next weekend, our church served potluck casseroles and forgiveness, and our pastor offered a sermon about secrets with the kind of gentle authority that makes you want to spill. I did not spill. I smiled. I shook hands. Americans are professional smilers. We can pin a grin to a collapsing building. But something in me had already begun the slow burn of revenge, not dramatic at first, just the kind of quiet that takes notes and dates and keeps receipts. I became a historian of my own house. I became the man who understands that infidelity is not just a word. It's a hallway full of doors slowly closing, and you sprinting after the last sliver of light. The night before the doctor appointment, the one she said was for routine labs, I dreamed our HOA president in a powdered wig pronounced sentence because our azaleas violated colonial authenticity. When I woke, I realized reality would be stranger than any dream. Emily poured lemon water like it was medicine. She looked at me and said we needed to talk, and the words landed like glass in the sink. What she said took the breath out of the room and folded it neatly. She was late. She had taken a test, and 2 pink lines do not care about your bedtime prayers. I whispered family, like I wanted the word to build a fence around us. She said softly that the timing was complicated. By the time I sat in Judge McKinley's courtroom weeks later, the gossip ecosystem of our town had evolved into a sentient creature. The moms of the cul-de-sac rotated like a think tank. The dads sent me links to lawyers who weren't Robert. The HOA newsletter carried a suspiciously eloquent paragraph about fidelity to community standards. And I, the mulched on Saturdays guy, looked into the camera and decided the only way to tell this story was to tell it backward and forward at once, like a parade that passes itself coming and going, because some betrayals are too big for linear time. If you have never been in an American suburb when the phrase, "I'm pregnant," lands with the mass of a meteor on a marriage already wobbling, you might not know about the underground government that wakes up overnight. They don't wear badges, they carry diaper cakes and spreadsheets. They call themselves a book club, but every chapter is classified. The mothers of the cul-de-sac convened at Shannon's Kitchen Island with a tasting flight of seltzers and the casual efficiency of a FEMA drill. And by the time I arrived, invited as the husband who might need casseroles, there were color-coded theories. One theory was miracle reconciliation, a hallmark arc in which cheating bends back toward family like a boomerang once the baby arrives. One theory was "Oh, honey," in which we all pretend for the good of Thanksgiving. The third theory, which Shannon whispered while arranging deviled eggs, was the existence of an elite brotherhood known only to those who have ever read the fine print of a trust, the Order of St. Prenup. Their insignia, she swore, was an owl on a set of scales, and their motto, etched secretly into mahogany conference tables, was "Protect the assets at all costs, especially from romantic math." I laughed because parody is how you breathe when betrayal gets tight around the lungs. But then I noticed an owl on Robert's cufflinks the next time I saw him. He met us at the OB's office the following Tuesday, all professional concern and a hand on my shoulder that felt like he was testing for weak joists. Emily was radiant in that particular way that breaks you. Cheating has a glow when it thinks it's turning into a new life. And I sat there playing the supportive husband because somewhere in the back of my head, small arguments about Costco and trash day still wanted a win. The ultrasound tech asked if we wanted to hear the heartbeat, and I nodded, thinking of car seats and college funds, and then watched Emily's eyes flicker toward Robert with a microsecond of private lightning. You can ruin a man with a flicker. On the way home, she talked about nursery paint. I talked about taxes, and beneath our banter, beribboned with American optimism, ran a current darker than the freeway. That night, I found an email in her drafts folder that began, "If we go forward, we need a plan that doesn't hurt him," and ended with a postscript about billing discreetly. Revenge is a dramatic word, cinematic, but it begins with small moves. I started a folder. I titled it Saturday. I put screenshots and dates and copies of explanations for why she needed to swing by the office on Sunday afternoons when the office should have been closed. I wrote down the church sermon topic, forgiveness again, and the pastor's story about a boy who returned a stolen baseball glove. Meanwhile, the mothers mobilized. Shannon stopped by with accidental gossip about Robert's last firm, about how he left under a cloud nobody could name. Margie said, not for nothing, but her cousin in the county clerk's office had once processed an emergency sealing of records that had Sterling's name on it. Conspiracy thrives in cul-de-sacs. It's how we pass the time between leaf removals. And yet I started stitching together a pattern that didn't feel like seltzer talk. Did the Order of St. Prenup exist? Probably only as a joke for guys like Robert, but jokes have a way of becoming policy. I stared at our wedding photo, at the way my hand rested on Emily's shoulder like I owned a porch in summer, and I felt the heavy American urge to fix things with a plan. I also felt the hiss of betrayal curling like steam around the word family. So I read. Late nights on my laptop, I learned how paternity timelines are calculated, how DNA testing actually works, how chain of custody can be broken by a smudge. I spiraled, yes, but productively, if there is such a category. I made an appointment at a discreet clinic behind a strip mall yoga studio where the receptionist spoke in lowercase. When the tech handed me the tiny barcode that represented the rest of my life, I thought of all the oaths we take without raising a hand. To show up, to not make the other person the villain, to pick up the slack when the dog throws up and the car won't start, to keep loving even when love starts looking like paperwork. I held the unopened envelope for a week. Emily floated around the house in a hopeful trance, rearranging shelves and laughing too brightly at TikToks about gentle parenting. Robert called twice with client updates and slipped the phrase, "if it's yours," into a sentence like a banana peel. I rehearsed speeches in the mirror in the car, once in line at Chipotle where a teenager in a varsity jacket looked up like he could smell the word divorce on me. Infidelity does not just break trust, it breaks choreography. It replaces the old two-step with a stutter where every move feels like a test. Somewhere between the cul-de-sac think tank, the ultrasound flicker, and the owl on cufflinks, I began to believe that my marriage had joined a larger theater, one where the law and the heart shake hands and pick each other's pockets. I told myself I'd open the envelope on Sunday after church. I told myself that if the verdict inside was mercy, I would lay down my need for revenge and rebuild. I also bought a new filing box and labeled the first tab Plan B, because Americans love a comeback story, but we love a well-executed sting even more. On Sunday, the choir sang about the wilderness, which felt on the nose, and Pastor Dan talked about forgiveness like it was a coupon that never expires, which felt maddening, and when the benediction ended, I walked straight to my car, shut the door, and opened the envelope like a man defusing a bomb by choosing to let it detonate. The numbers on the page didn't shout. They whispered in a tidy medical font that the probability of paternity was essentially 0. Not low, not unlikely. 0. I stared at the decimal places as if I could bargain one back to me. There is a kind of silence that follows betrayal, where you can hear your own blood taking attendance. I drove home without memory and found Emily on the floor folding onesies she had ordered during a midnight surge of optimism. She looked up and I saw it, that same flicker from the ultrasound, the one that had installed a tiny distance between us even when our knees touched. I told her I'd gotten the test. I told her what it said. She cried the way people cry when a story they were auditioning for gets canceled. Grief mixed with rage at the network. She said she didn't mean to fall in love with him. She said love is complicated and toxic. Love is a real phenomenon, as if BuzzFeed had replaced the DSM. She said the word family like an apology and also like a dare. I asked if she loved him. She said she loved what he made her feel, seen, powerful, smarter than the life we'd built. The American dream is a tricky realtor. It sells you a house and forgets to mention the land shifts. Then Robert arrived, because of course he did, with his lawyerly concern and his hand gestures like traffic cops for feelings. He talked about support structures and co-parenting and respectful transitions, and I did the math in my head and realized I was being eased out of my own living room by the man who had drafted our will. Something ancient in me wanted to flip a table. Something more modern wanted to start a podcast. Instead, I told them both the truth. I would not destroy myself so they could install a fairy tale on the ruins. Betrayal is contagious. Revenge, if you let it, makes you fluent. That night, after everyone left, I wrote a letter to the state bar. The next night, I wrote to the ethics committee at Robert's former firm, naming the owl and the scales and the business with the prenups. After that, I wrote to a journalist who covers local power dramas and also occasionally reviews barbecue joints. Americans trust a reporter who can tell you where to get good ribs. I did not send the letters, not yet. I needed proof that would sing in court, not just hiss on the internet. So I became friendly with a barista in the lobby of Robert's building who had a gift for remembering orders and conversations, and I became friendly with Diligence, and Diligence introduced me to Accident, and Accident handed me a calendar invite screenshot that located Robert and Emily in the office together on Sundays with a recurring label called Legacy Planning, which is the funniest euphemism in the state. Still, I didn't blow it up, not then. I invited them to dinner, sincere, awkward, the three of us at our farmhouse table with cloth napkins like we were requesting a Michelin star for delusion. I said I wanted to make peace for the good of the child. I suggested painfully that perhaps we could do holidays together, a modern family shaped oddly but stable. I watched their faces tilt toward hope, and somewhere awful inside me, a lever pulled. You can call this the turn. You can call it the end of my good guy era. I told them I was meeting with a counselor, which was true. I did not tell them the counselor also specialized in high-conflict custody and had a Rolodex of expert witnesses. I congratulated them on their brave honesty. I asked Robert if, purely hypothetical, a lawyer could face consequences for representing a family while secretly impregnating the wife. He said that sounded like a conflict of interest in a law school exam, which is a cute way to say yes. I toasted with sparkling water. I posted a photo of our glasses clinking, captioned "New Chapter," because Instagram is the theater where Americans test drive narratives. My DMs lit with friends who called me a saint, a doormat, a philosopher king. I wasn't any of those. I was a stage manager setting lights for a reveal. The mothers of the cul-de-sac, bless them, started a GoFundMe for baby supplies that raised enough to make a decent down payment on a mid-size stroller, and among the donors was a paralegal from Robert's old firm who left a note, "Some men should not have keys." I met her for coffee. She told me, as gently as possible, that Robert had a history of what HR calls boundary issues, and what the rest of us call patterns. She said the Order of St. Prenup was an inside joke, but the joke always lands on the women and the poorer spouse. I asked if she would talk to a journalist. She shrugged and said maybe, if she could be blurred out. Revenge is not noble. It's a machine you build out of hurt and craft from parts labeled, "I told you so." But sometimes it's the only language power understands. I sent the letters. In American court, the truth wears a suit and raises a hand. On the morning the Bar Association hearing opened its digital doors, I put on my only tie that still fit and watched a panel of polite professionals ask if it was true that Robert Sterling had simultaneously represented our family in financial matters and engaged in a romantic relationship with my wife that resulted in pregnancy. The transcript will record that he said, "I dispute the characterization," which is a hilarious sentence for a man who has fathered a child and nicknamed office trysts legacy planning. The panel asked about conflicts, about duties to clients, about trust, so basic it's practically plumbing. I submitted the emails, the calendar invites, the texts where he reminded Emily to use personal email, billing discreet, the ultrasound appointment he attended as pro bono support. Legal consequences are slow horses, but they move. He was suspended pending investigation. The journalist with the rib reviews published a piece titled "When Your Family Lawyer Becomes Family," and the comment section filled with Americans who have turned betrayal into folk wisdom. Meanwhile, Emily spiraled, then smoothed, then spiraled again. I would like to tell you I behaved with grace, But this is the part of the story where the word revenge stops wearing a cape and starts wearing my face. I hired a rival firm, run by Robert's mentor, which is its own flavor of operatic, and I gave them everything. I did not just seek custody terms, I sought reputational weather. We built a timeline that sang. We filed a complaint that hummed. We requested sanctions that made even legal clerks look up. But pure betrayal, the kind I promised in my head on the night I watched them touch hands across that hotel bar, arrived not in court, but at a baby shower. The mothers of the cul-de-sac, being both kind and unstoppable, insisted on throwing a party, because every child deserves joy. They set up a mountain of diapers, a banner that read, "Welcome Little Light," and a punch that could dissolve doubt. I stood to say a few words as the quasi-ex-husband who still occupied the house, out of strategic prudence, and the room silenced in that American way where a crowd becomes a congregation. I talked about family, about how it's not always genetics, about how cheating and infidelity wound more than two people. They wound a neighborhood, a Thanksgiving table, a story you thought you were writing. People nodded, a few dabbed eyes. Then I said there was one more thing I wanted to share, since we were all invested in truth and diapers. I held up an envelope. I said sometimes love gets so toxic we forget to check the oxygen mask. I said I had run a second test with an independent lab because chain of custody matters, and we were, after all, a very lawful group. I read the result. 0. The air did a strange thing. It folded and refolded itself like origami. Emily's face drained the way a lake drains when the dam slips. Robert stood, then sat, then stood again, and for once his hands couldn't conduct the traffic of feelings. I wasn't done. This is the part people will judge me for, and they should. I thanked everyone for coming. I thanked the Order of St. Prenup for inspiring my research. I thanked the rival firm for their help with a civil suit filed that morning for intentional infliction of emotional distress and breach of fiduciary duty. Then I turned to the door, where a woman had slipped in late, a woman in a navy dress who looked like the kind of person you assume is competent before she speaks. "This is Monica," I said, and the room performed the collective inhale of a society trained by streaming television. She is Robert's ex-wife. She and I have been having coffee. She is also the new general counsel at his mentor's firm, the one that just poached his biggest client after my file landed on their desk like a broken compass. Betrayal breeds betrayal. We smiled, not romantically, don't worry, Internet, but like colleagues at a ribbon cutting after a long zoning fight. The party did not end so much as melt. People took their casseroles back in slow motion as if reverse catering could unwind fate. After, Emily sat on our porch and asked if I hated her, and I told her the truest thing I could muster. I hated the version of me that tolerated being erased. I hated the way we let the American dream turn into a competitive internship. I hated how easy it is to turn people into instruments. She asked if I would ever forgive her. I said forgiveness is a door I might open when I'm not standing behind it with a baseball bat. In court, months later, things got tidy the way the law makes messes tidy. Custody in the shape of reality, financials in the shape of consequence. Robert with a suspension and a career that now Googles differently. The newspaper article framed in the rib joint next to the register like a local legend. The mothers of the cul-de-sac returned to book club, and the HOA fought about seasonal inflatables. And me? I bought a smaller house with a bigger porch. I joined a men's group where we talk about pain without pretending it's a TED Talk. I learned that revenge is a meal that tastes like victory for 5 minutes and then sits strangely in your stomach for a year. I also learned that betrayal does not end a story. It renames it. My story stopped being just mine the day I spoke into a room full of cake pops and told the truth. If you're here for the ending where I say, "I'm better now," I am. On Tuesdays. If you're here for the ending where I say I do it all differently, I would. except for the part where I chose myself. The judge never did rule on immaculate deposition. She did, however, look over her glasses at me one last time and say, "Mr. Harper, may we recommend fewer live streams?" I told her I'd try. America loves an audience. I'm learning to love a quiet room where no one is keeping score.